Okay, so in Colossians chapter 3, it starts out by saying, you have a new life, and you need to be putting off the things of the old life. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth. And it lists all of these various things that we need to get rid of. But then it doesn't stop there. It says, now put these things on. Begin to add these things to your life, because a human being is not a vacuum. You cannot simply remove bad habits. You must replace them with something positive. And so he listed a bunch of various things that we went over there at the end of class. Bowels of compassion, that is, that kind feelings towards other people when they're hurting, that you have that sense of mercy. Kindness, that you are the type of person that does things that are simply kind for kind's sake. They are the type of things that shower blessings on other people just because it's the kind thing to do. That we are humble people, that we must put on an attitude of understanding our place in this world in respect to God and in respect to our fellow man, that we are not better than anyone else, and that we are all subject to God, all equally made in His image and equally have value, so that your time is not more valuable than somebody else's time. Your needs are not more important than other people's needs. Your feelings are not more important than other people's feelings. That sense of humility that creates unity. Meekness, that is, you're not harsh. You're not the kind of person that is going to push your way through at all costs. Of course, this is a very difficult thing to do when you want something. When you want something, your tendency is to do whatever it takes to get that thing. Meekness says, no, I will pull back and measure my behavior appropriately, that I won't use words that are too strong and will hurt instead of help. We would be long-suffering. That is, we would be patient people, that we are in it for the long haul with our fellow saints. That, as part of the Lord's church, you look at being a part of a congregation, and that's not, being a healthy congregation is not something that happens overnight, and a congregation being destroyed doesn't happen overnight. It is an endurance race to be God's people in a local area. And so it's not a matter of making one good decision, one grand act of godliness. It is about long-term patience with one another and endurance to serve the Lord. That we would be the type of people who forbear one another. When we deal with each other, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to make bad choices. When others hurt you, when others make decisions that you look at and you say that was the wrong decision, are you going to show patience with them? Are you going to bear with them in that growth process? As a child grows, they make 9 gazillion decisions and choices that really will exasperate the parents, and yet the parents have to say, no, I need to bear with this until this child reaches maturity. Forgiving each other. Part of course, these two could really be tied together. Not only are you bearing with one another in the growth process, but as people make mistakes, do we truly let them go? Many a congregation has been destroyed because of the death by 1,000 cuts. The more time people spend together, the more likely they are to offend each other at some given point. And what we do when we are offended will decide our future, and it will decide your future as an individual. How you react when somebody hurts you. Do you say, well, I'll bear with them, but I won't forget. I won't ever really let it go. And we hold those grudges, we hold those old hurts and harms deep within us. When we do that, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. Congregations begin to fall apart because people cannot ever move past this thing that somebody did to them, or this hurt that they went to, or this time somebody gossiped about them, and accept the fact that we're all growing and we make mistakes. So we need to be the kind of people who put off all of those wicked things and put on things like forgiveness. And then it says, above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. Take and wrap it all up in an attitude of love. at all times in your life, you go through interacting with your fellow man, and you always ask yourself the question, am I doing what is in their best interest? If that's how you live life, in every interaction, you're going to be okay. It will be the bond of completeness, the bond of perfection. It will make you a complete person, because that is a healthy individual. Christ said that God, one of the things that makes God different than men is that He rains He rains the rain down on the righteous and on the unrighteous. He shows kindness to all people and without bias. That's what we need to be. We need to be those kind of people that put on love. So whether you're dealing with your enemy or your best friend, whether it's a good day for you or you woke up on the wrong side of the bed, you are the kind of person that says, am I doing what is in others' best interest? And then that's where we left off last week. And then here at the very end, down about verse 15, he says, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts. Now this is a very big statement, because whenever you say rule, let something rule, what you're doing is you're giving it authority. Our rulers are those who have authority to make laws that we must obey. So if somebody is a ruler, they have authority over you. Well, here in verse 15 of Colossians chapter 3, we're told by Paul, if you as God's people wish to be the kind of people you ought to be, you're going to have to let peace become the ruler. And what that really looks like is, as you interact with people, you're always asking yourself, does this make for peace? Am I saying things that are peaceful things, that are trying to reconcile? That I say things that are, my words are seasoned with grace. Romans says, as much as depends on you, be at peace with all men. If we go through life with an attitude of, I'm going to be a peacemaker. Remember what Christ said on that? Blessed is the peacemaker. As you and I live, we want to be peacemakers. So in everything that we do, we need to ask ourselves, am I doing something that's making this situation better? Am I trying to lower the volume in a heated discussion? Am I the one trying to calmly speak, trying to be careful and metered with my tone and my words? Or am I ramping it up? Am I the one adding and stoking the flames to make the anger increase? We see this in our marriages. We see this with our kids, especially as they get older and start hitting those teen years. There's that escalation in certain conversations, right? And it just kind of seems like one thing and piles another, and each person plays this game of one-upmanship of who can say the more inflammatory thing, the thing that'll bring more anger into the situation. Don't do that. It says, let peace rule. When you are confronted with somebody that is angry or hurt or a situation that is divisive, you ask yourself, am I adding a peacemaker to the mix? We see this today up on Capitol Hill, and you look at the lawmakers, and they have the discussions over debt, and no matter where you stand on that particular issue, you look at the Republicans and Democrats, and what are they doing right now? They're just fighting and fighting and fighting and arguing and arguing and arguing. And now, there's not a whole lot of peacemakers in there, is there? See, that's what happens is at some point, when everybody says, I'm going to point my gun, and you're going to point your gun, and we're going to play this game of chicken, what happens? Well, eventually somebody gets shot. Unless you have peacemakers in the Lord's church, this is one of those things that you will see, is that there are times where problems begin to brew, because every congregation has them. And as those problems begin to brew, it builds up, and it builds up to the point where until it runs into a peacemaker. So the goal is for us, we never want problems to get very big. It's always better to kill problems when they're little baby problems, isn't it? Just get them when they're young. Well, if we want to do that as the Lord's people, we've got to be peacemakers so that when a problem comes up, it'll always run into a peacemaker very, very quickly. So let peace rule. Within your heart, within your life, within your discussions, within your the words that you use, and let peace rule your tongue and your mind and your heart. Then you can begin to truly make a difference. And he says, and be thankful, to which you were called in one body. So here it is, we're to be people of peace. Why? We're called in one body. And if body's divided against itself, it's going to have problems. And he says, and be thankful. Many, many times we run into problems in life purely because we've stopped being grateful. All we do is remember the time this person offended us, and we don't remember the 200 times that they did something that was kind. We remember the one mean word, and we don't remember the days and days of good, happy, healthy discussion that were just pure. We are very quick to notice that which offends us, but we all seem to struggle with being thankful. And so here Paul says, put on a thankful heart. So count your blessings. You know, when you're interacting with somebody and you start feeling yourself upset, count your blessings. Count the blessings that person is to you. Count up the good things about them. If you take your enemies and you begin to count the things that are good about them, and it's sometimes kind of a hard thing, especially when you're not happy, but you begin to count the things you're thankful for, you will find yourself behaving how you ought to. So put on thankfulness. If you live in a house where people say please and thank you, if you see that in a home, you walk into somebody's house and the wife, the husband, the kids, they're always saying please and thank you. What do you typically find in that kind of environment? You find a lot more harmony. Yeah. And it's just a simple thing, isn't it? Please and thank you. But it goes a long way, doesn't it? When somebody says thank you, it's a small thing, but it means a lot because gratitude has an impact on us. So be the kind of people who are thankful. If you show your gratitude to God and you show your gratitude to your fellow man when they do a good turn to you, you will find yourself being the kind of person you want to be and having a whole lot more harmony in your life. Anybody have any comments or questions on that section? Okay, well then let's move on down to verse 16. Now down in verse 16 we move to a new section, and this is really what I'd say is the last section here, where he begins to deal with the issue of people interacting with one another, and there's different major groups. The first one he's going to deal with is brethren interacting with brethren. Now this is a verse that we talk about a lot because it applies to our worship, to singing. He says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Now there's a lot in this verse, but keep the context in mind. Now we normally take this verse, we pull it out and we say, see, this is where God tells us to sing when we worship Him. And that is one of the verses that you can go to that says we should sing. When we worship God, we should all sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. But what's the context talking about? It's putting on that new man and how we interact with each other, putting on that peace, that thankfulness, that bond of perfection, love. When we as brethren come together, we should let the word of Christ dwell in us richly in all wisdom. That's the first thing. If any congregation is going to have success, it's going to have to be full of people who let the word of Christ dwell in them richly. Now you notice there, it's how's the word of Christ dwell in you? Just a little bit? It's richly, isn't it? Now that's a word that means abundantly. It means a lot of it. So here, as we talk as Christians, where's the point where you can say, I know enough of the Word that I can now sit back and I say, okay, I've studied my Bible, I know what the books are about, I'm okay. Where's that point? See, no, you don't reach that point any more than a man going after wealth gets to the point where he's got enough of it. You should be greedy for the Word of Christ. You want it to dwell in you richly in all wisdom. And so there's the first thing. If we want harmony within the church, because this is dealing with teaching and admonishing one another. We're talking about brethren interacting with brethren. The first thing we've got to have is this book. This becomes our standard, and it becomes not just our standard, but the thing that all of us are steeping ourselves in. All of us are trying to learn from and glean knowledge and grow in. So that it's not just, okay, here's the rule book and we'll refer to it when we need to. This is the book I go back to at all times to fill my soul. It is the bread to fill my spirit. And then he says, once we are that kind of people that dwell in all wisdom and of the Word of Christ richly, we should teach and admonish one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Now, here, as we look at this, there's two things that come up. When we sing, there's two things we're doing. One is, right down to the bottom, we're singing with grace in our hearts to the Lord. So we'll skip the middle part and go to the bottom first. When we sing, it's a form of worship. And God cares about our hearts. He wants to hear that grace in your heart. He wants to hear those heartstrings plucked. He wants that when we sing, it would be something that's heartfelt, not by rote. We don't just, well, I've sung this 10,000 times, and so I'll just kind of sing through it, and I'm not thinking, and I just kind of go along with the group. But that every time we sing, there's a zeal there, there's a vigor, there's an enthusiasm, and it matters. And this is something that every one of us has to examine ourselves in. And this is something that our song leaders try and emphasize, is we should be zealous when we sing. We should be enthusiastic when we sing to the Lord, because how we feel about the words we're singing matters to God. Now, God doesn't care one whit about the tone of your voice. You know, if you're off key, that doesn't bother Him. But He does care if your heart's off key. If you make the most beautiful, wonderful sound coming from your lips, but your heart is far from God, you just forget it. How many times can we read in the Bible where the Jews, they made their sacrifices, they made their burnt offerings to God, but their hearts were far from Him? It was just constant. And God says, you're backsliders, and you are hard-hearted, and I will not accept your offering because of your heart. Here's our singing. Where's your heart? Are you singing with grace in your heart to the Lord? That word grace is a word we use for gift. Normally, when we talk about grace, we talk about it from God to us. God's grace to us, His greatest gift of grace, was His Son. Jesus was God's gift to us that we might be forgiven. But the word grace just means that the unmerited favor. It means a gift that you would give. So here, when we sing to God, are you giving it to Him as a gift? Or are you giving it to Him because you have to do it? And that matters. It matters a whole lot. Now there's a second part, though. He says that when you sing, not only are you singing to the Lord, but you're also singing, and somebody else is hearing too. One another. And when we hear it, when Gene hears me sing, does Gene know whether I have grace in my heart when I sing? Gene doesn't know one whit. He doesn't know at all. He could guess, but he could guess dead wrong. And the same goes for me with Gene. Gene gets up and he's leading songs, and I think he's got grace in his heart, but he could be lying to me. So we don't hear the grace part. We don't get what God gets out of singing. What we get out of it is the teaching and admonishing one another. in the Psalms and in the hymns and in the spiritual songs, we are reminded of spiritual things. Now, if you begin to flip through that songbook and you begin to look at the different songs that we sing, each one of them has a message, doesn't it? There's something in there that it's emphasizing. Either it's emphasizing Christ's sacrifice and the thorn crown brow. I think that's one of the lines in one of the songs. Or it's emphasizing that we ought to be a people who are charitable, or that we're the light of the world. Every song has a point it's making, doesn't it? There's always something there that it's focusing on. Just think of it just like a little itty-bitty sermon. When we sing, we are reminding each other in those little itty-bitty sermons about what matters. And this is why it's important that we be careful of the songs that we sing. There are lots of religious songs out there that are flat out not biblical. The words aren't right. And you say, well, I'm singing it with grace in my heart. Yeah, but are you teaching the truth? If the words don't match the Scriptures, then we've got a problem. And so we have to understand that it is a part of the teaching process. God has designed singing to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. We give Him worship, we give Him praise, and it brings Him joy. And at the same time, as we read the words and we sing the words and we hear unified voices bringing it together, it grabs your attention. Think about that. When you hear a lot of people singing together, it naturally will perk your attention. It grabs you and it gets your focus. When we sing, that's what we're doing. We're trying to, as we worship God, also focus on things that matter, which is one of the reasons I really appreciate our song leaders, that they pick their songs and they try and pick songs that they believe are meaningful. And sometimes, have guys and they'll get up and they say, yeah, all of these songs deal with this particular character trait, or we're going to sing about Christ, or because that's part of the job of singing. So, here you have this picture. How does the church find unity? Well, one way it does is singing. When we sing, we remind each other of what we're here for. So do not underestimate the importance of that. And as somebody who grew up in the denominational world where everybody didn't sing, you had the choir up front and they were the beautiful singers and they sang, I can tell you there's a difference. There's a big difference between going to a concert where other people are singing about things that are important to them and lending your own voice to it too, because now all of a sudden you've got a stake in the game. It changes things in a way that I think we really don't always appreciate because it's such a normal part of our lives. We don't really realize what a benefit we are given by the Lord in that He tells us to all do it together. Anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah. 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 No, I can't emphasize enough how much I agree with what Gene just said. There's just that you're personally responsible. There's something about we all sing that it's like sit up and represent. You're a part of this, and you have to put your share in. And it kind of was a wake-up call for me, because I felt very much like you did, that just, there's this disconnect. And singing is one way that it really, God really plugs us all in there together and says, you're all a part of the same thing. So yeah, no, I very much feel the same way. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, And then the next thing we move to is relationships within family. Now, the first one he mentions in verse 18. He says, wives, submit to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord. And so here you have this command to wives that they are to be submissive, and there's a caveat put in there. How are wives supposed to submit to their husbands? As is fitting in the Lord. So now that means there's two things to that. One is, it's fitting when Eve is Adam's helpmeet. Because why was Eve created? Because Adam was alone, and God designed her to be a helpmeet. That's fitting. She is matching her design. And it is not a humiliating thing when done biblically. It's not the kind of thing that is a lack of respect. It's the kind of thing that God designed. It's the way He intended it to be. Each of us has equal value in the church, but we also have different roles. So one, it's fitting when Eve fulfills the role God designed for her. The other element to that is, if you have a husband and he is constantly telling his wife to behave in a way that is ungodly, should she? No, she should only submit to her husband as is fitting in the Lord. So if she is married to a man, he says, well, let's just not go to services today. Well, does she have a right and even a responsibility, I would say, to say, no, I'm going? I would say, yes, she does. Because it's not fitting in the Lord. We submit to the Lord first. And so here it is, within a family. Steve did Proverbs 31 last Sunday morning. When you have a Proverbs 31 woman that is the power behind the family, that's what you see in Proverbs 31. This woman who is taking care of everybody. She is this pillar of morality and goodness, always laboring for the benefit of others, so that she is a blessing to all she comes in contact with. The family becomes a wonderful thing because of the impact that she has. Nobody is capable of affecting the outcome of a family more than the wife. And Proverbs really lays that out. Not just in Proverbs chapter 31, but throughout Proverbs you have these things about ungodly women who tear their houses down with their own hands. Now, it never says a man can do that. A man just simply doesn't have the ability to destroy a family the way a wife does. Now, I'm not saying a man can't. He can do lots of dumb things. But the power a woman has is so much more so. And so in the way she acts, if she is that helpmeet, if she is that Proverbs 31 woman, industrious and kind and thoughtful and a blessing to all that she comes in contact with, the family will truly be blessed. We see the opposite all the time, and we have little quippy sayings. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. All sorts of little things in our culture that teach the same concept. The wife has power. And when she takes the husband and she gives him the honor of being the leader, it's her choice to give it. When she gives him that honor to lead, wonderful, wonderful things happen in the family. And then it says, husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them. Here you have a husband, and he is told, give your wife love. And you notice it never tells wives to give their husbands love, because wives are pretty good at that. Husbands, you need to be the kind of person who is affectionate towards your wife, that you show her that she matters, that you give her the praise for her behavior, you show her that she is the number one person in your life, and you make sure that you are not embittered against her. This is a very, very common thing with men, is for men to become aloof, and we get upset and we distance ourselves and we draw back so we don't engage. Well, that's very, very hurtful to women. And it brings a deep pain to them that I don't think us men really understand. So men, don't do that. Do not be embittered against your wife. Don't be secretly angry with her. You have to make sure that you are giving her that proper level of attention and affection as she deserves, because she's your helpmeet. She has dedicated her life to making you look good, buddy. And that's a pretty big commitment. She deserves all the accolades and kindness you can give her. Do not be secretly angry against her. Do not be embittered towards her. Now, if you just stop right there. You take a husband, and he's affectionate towards his wife. There's no animosity there. He doesn't distance himself from her. He goes out of his way to be the kind of loving husband he ought to be. And you have a wife, and she's respectful to her husband. She submits to him. She honors him to lead the house. How's that family going to turn out? You just stop right there. Let's not even talk about the children yet. Do you see what good happens if you just right there, just those two? If you just stopped at just those two things, you have got a recipe for an absolutely, unbelievably successful marriage. And successful marriages tend to have successful children. And so now when we get to the children, we're now looking at this thing of a couple that's happy, they're healthy, they're serving the Lord, and they're serving one another, where they are putting each other's needs first. Then it says, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. So here you have mom and dad. They're obeying their commands. And then you put children into that environment of parents like that. And the best thing you can do for those kids is tell them to obey mom and dad. You just trust your parents because they're good people and they want to do what's in your best interest. Obedience in children is something that we're taught is to make children obey is kind of a no-no in our society today. We're told, no, let them be free spirits. Let them, learn how to interact with their environment on their own. Don't put too many restrictions on them. If you give them too much guidance, you'll crush their spirits. I mean, just on and on that goes with the language that our society uses to say, really, basically, the best parenting is hands-off parenting. Your Bible says the opposite. Now, it's important for us to remember, and every time I go over passages like this, I try and say this because I think it's such a big deal. When God put this verse in, He figured it would be the parents who are reading it, not the 3-year-old. God did not expect your 3-year-old to go up and go, oh, Colossians 3:20, children, obey your parents. That's right. Okay, I'll do what Mommy says. Your Bible is written to adults. So God put this in here so that parents would know you have a right and a responsibility to tell your kids to obey. That's your job. You're not crushing their little spirits. You're not destroying them. You're not hurting their future and turning them into mini axe murderers. You are blessing them when you teach them obedience. Because when you get further down the line and they grow up and they are now responsible before God, what is God going to tell them? Obey me. And if they've not learned what obedience looks like from mom and dad, you've created a big deficit they've got to dig themselves out of. If they do not know how to submit to mom and dad and obey mom and dad's will, they're really going to struggle when it comes time to obey their heavenly Father's will. And so God says, parents, teach your children to obey. It's pleasing in God's sight. So when you go and you spank your kid, you just think God's happy right now. He likes this because He does. You are blessing your child when you do that. And I can't emphasize that enough simply because our society emphasizes the opposite all the time. We need to make sure and emphasize the biblical teaching on that subject. Then it says, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Now here, and I'm as guilty of it as the next father. There's a reason fathers are given this command. Any parent can provoke their children, but I think dads are especially fond of pulling our kids' legs to the point where they just get a little frustrated with us. It's really easy for fathers to take that authority God's given and to use it for our own personal amusement. Now, I'll give you a worst case scenario story, true story. Had a teacher, he had a son, and he thought it would be really, really funny. Now, this is extreme, but this tells you what dads do and what we think is funny. Here's a dad, and he thought it'd be really funny to experiment on his brand new baby son. So whenever he was around his kid, anytime he used the word for restroom, he said brambleberry patch. And so his son never knew the word for bathroom or restroom. He always heard brambleberry patch. That's what his dad always did. Just true story. So the kid grew up. See, the dad's already laughing. It's funny until the kid went to kindergarten and asked the teacher to go to the brambleberry patch, and the teacher wouldn't let him go because he didn't know what the brambleberry patch was, and the kid wet himself. There was a father that provoked his kid, exasperated his kid. Now, every dad likes to pull jokes, and I'm not opposed to them because, like I said, I'm just guilty as the next guy. But we can take it too far. Now, that's an extreme, but it does happen where the kids feel like, okay, all I am is just somebody for dad to poke at and make fun of. And then what you've done is instead of teaching your children obedience and respect for authority, you've taught them authority abuses power. And there's a balance, isn't there? We want to teach our children obedience, but we want to show them that obedience to us is a healthy thing for their benefit, not we make up a bunch of rules just because we like to get a good laugh out of it. So, as we go through life as parents, we have this huge responsibility. God has said, tell your kids obey. You have every right to make them do what you want them to do, but don't abuse the power. Don't use it for your own personal amusement, because it's very easy to go that route. So fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Many a child has never heard from their father, I'm proud of you, or I love you. And dad just doesn't encourage the kids. And I'll tell you, those kids grow up and have a hard time of it, because if you don't think that you can ever be good enough, you go through life with some major mental issues. And it all starts with dad so much of the time. Kids look to mom and dad and say, you give me my value. What am I worth? And if we tell them all you're worth is a joke to us, or all you're worth is for somebody who's in my way and I can yell at whenever you get in my way, they're going to become discouraged. And think about it. They're going to grow up, and whenever they hear the words Father in heaven, what are they going to associate? Because they only have one reference point for a Heavenly Father, don't they? Us. We're their reference point. So do not discourage your children. Okay, next one. We move on down, and you move to masters and slaves. Now, starting in verse 22, we deal with the slave side. Now, we'll have one verse down in chapter 4, verse 1, where this subject bleeds into chapter 4, that talks about the master side, but it says slaves. Now, bondservants. Now, this is a big deal, because here you have somebody, a slave, and they are subject to whatever the whim and the will of their master is. And many, many Christians were slaves in non-Christian households. So if you're a bondservant, if you are responsible to somebody else and they have that authority over you, obey in all things your master according to the flesh. Now, this is easy for us to read. But if you had a slave and they had a master who was just a taskmaster, how hard would it be to obey when they just felt abused on every corner? See, there are times in life where we really have to suck up our pride and go, okay, I'm going to do what's right, even though what I want to do is pop the guy in the nose. And that's what God says here to servants. He says, just have that obedience to your masters who are according to the flesh, and don't do it with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. One of the things you see over and over again in your Bible is that God cultivates within the hearts of Christians a servant's attitude. It is not just enough to do the right thing. He wants you to do it, and do it with sincerity of heart, fearing God. You've got to do it with an attitude that is right. So don't just do what you have to do, but grumble and murmur the whole time. Be somebody who is a good servant regardless. Now we can see connections to this in the workplace. Just about everybody's had a bad boss at some time. And typically if you're an employee and there's a bad boss, you're not the only employee who's upset by him. You could be one of those many employees who are grumbling about the boss behind their back. Or you can serve, not with eye service as men pleasers, where you do what the boss says and then you yell about him in the back corner, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. Because your service isn't about who you're serving. It's not about the wage you're earning. It's not about the person that you are doing it for. Because in all things, we're to be servants of God. He says, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. In everything we do, do it heartily. That's a very difficult statement because there's a lot of things that you run into in life that you just don't feel like doing. Tasks that you are required to do but don't enjoy, things you're asked to do that aren't your responsibility and yet it's been thrown on your plate, meetings you don't want to go to and yet you've got to go to, or I can think of working at the zoo, there were many unenjoyable tasks that were put in front of me and you got to do them. So remember who you're doing it for. Who do you serve every day? It's the Lord you put first. And then he puts this little caveat in there to the servant. He who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. Here it is. You have a servant, and he says, my master is wicked, he's mean, he's ruthless, he does all of these things, and I'm supposed to just obey him? Yes, you are, because you serve the Lord. And don't worry, he who does wrong, that master that mistreats you, will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. There will come a day where vengeance belongs to the Lord. So you serve the Lord, and the Lord will take care of your enemies and those who mistreat you. And then in chapter 4, down in verse 1, it says, masters. So when you flip it and you have a Christian who is a master and he has slaves, master, give your bondservants what is just and fair, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Do you see how the biblical view of things is that even in a world of slavery, if you have Christians on both sides of it, you have Christian masters and Christian slaves, it's not that bad. Because the servant serves as if he serves the Lord and does his work heartily, and the master treats the servant in a just and fair way, knowing that he has a master he's accountable to. Whenever you have power and authority over other people, don't abuse it, because God has authority over you. And by what measure you use, you don't want to be judged. You don't want to be judged by a harsh measure because you treated other people harshly when you had authority over them. So that finishes up there. That section in Colossians where... Oh, yep, Dave? Okay. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the concepts of verse 17 apply there for sure as well. Yeah, it's as a matter of fact, I'd say 17 and down in verse 23 there are really kind of sistered together, kind of like sandwiching bookends on the subject of interacting with men. Yeah.
The second comment is about the husbands loving their wives.
Uh-huh.
In Titus 2:4, it does tell the older women to teach the younger
That's a different word for love. It's a phileo love. This is agape. The Bible never tells wives to agape love their husbands. It does tell them to phileo love them, though. Yes, but you're right. That one does there, but that's more of it's a friendly love, which of course is a type of love too, but it's a different than what's being used in that particular verse there. Oh, no problem. Yeah.
Just a quick comment about servants. A really great example of a servant obeying their master, but in the Lord, working for the Lord, is Daniel as a king. He's a great example of that.
I think so. Yeah, no, absolutely. He obeyed Nebuchadnezzar, and yet when Nebuchadnezzar asked him to, they gave the unclean food for him to eat. He says, we won't eat it, give us vegetables instead. And, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego drawing that line. And yet, he was Nebuchadnezzar's most trusted servant. No matter, Daniel had his lines, but Nebuchadnezzar still, he was the go-to guy in everything because he knew he was a faithful servant who would work hardly for him. So yeah, I think that's a great example of it. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, we'll stop there and we will finish the book of Colossians next week.